Hello, welcome to another Enterprise Nation member masterclass. I'm Emily, your host today. Special one for you this week. I am chatting to Kiel Harkness from UPS. So UPS are the sponsor of our Enterprise Nation Go Global Trade missions. Amsterdam, New York, and China and Hong Kong coming up in November. Those just to whet your appetite. So hopefully this is going to give you some hints and tips that you might be able to put into practice if you are joining us or you fancy joining us on our trade mission to China later in the autumn. Kiel, over to you, and then we will take some questions about how to be export ready for trading in China.
Great. Thanks, Emily, and hello, everyone, and thank you for taking some time today. I'm sure out of your busy schedules to listen to, again, how to be export ready in terms of trading in China. So, as Emily said, I'm Kiel Harkness. I have the distinct pleasure of being responsible for marketing for UPS in the UK, Ireland, and the Nordics. 17 years in the logistics business, proudly all with UPS. A little bit of context, why me, why today? I've spent the last 3.5 years or so in Asia with UPS, spending a lot of time in China actually, and getting to understand the customer and the landscape in China, and ultimately even who your potential competitors could be there should you choose to go into that market. So great afternoon here in the London area, beautiful weather, and also the timing is right. As Emily mentioned, we've got the Enterprise Nation Go Global Trade Mission to Hong Kong and China just around the corner in November. But certainly enough time for you to look at your calendars and think about whether or not it makes sense to get into that trip. We think it does. We're a proud sponsor of it, and hopefully from what I'll share today may motivate you to give that another thought. A little bit more background, again, why UPS? So we've been in the international space for quite some time. We believe that export is a good avenue for growth. We think the export market will generally outperform most domestic economies, and we've been in the international game for about 40 years. So we've been in Europe for 40 years, UK for 30, and China specifically for 25 years. So we've got over 220 some odd facilities in China, two very state-of-the-art air facilities, one in South China, one in the East. But the point of all that is to say, I think we've got a good footprint there, good feet on the street to understand the market, and what we want to do is come and share some of our insights with you, help you get into China more successfully. So we've got 4 tips we'll share. We'll go right in. Tip number 1, get to grips with rules and regulations. So if this is about doing your homework, doing the research up front, you guys are all used to doing in your normal business, but this becomes increasingly important in China if you look at the distance, the languages, and the complexities of really dealing with a country that is not only massive in size, but very difficult to navigate from a regulatory perspective. So depending on what you're looking at, 23 to 34 provinces, all of them or many of them with different regulations. So depending on where you're shipping from, what your commodity type is, and even where into China you're shipping is going to influence your requirements around customs and duties. So some simple pointers. First step, if you have not exported outside the EU already, then you're going to need, first of all, an EORI number. That's an Economic Operators Registration Identification. That is issued by the UK government. You will need that. You should look at the tariff codes for all the products you're thinking about exporting into China. This will be very, very important for China and the markets, again, and the different provinces there. A customs hold in China is going to be a little bit different than a customs hold in some of your Western markets if you're currently exporting, based on language and a number of other issues or reasons. Look at your goods. Some of the restrictions in China are maybe not intuitive around some commodity types. So there's some websites that the UK government runs. We'll provide those as follow-up, but you can certainly go in and look at all of your goods to make sure if and to what extent they're regulated or some sort of license control is required. But a good point that we like to share with our customers as they're looking at China is just think anything below 800 pounds in terms of the transaction value, the value of goods, is much more straightforward in terms of the export import into China. In terms of the customs clearance, it's pretty simplified. But if you're maybe dealing in a wholesale or an agent relationship where your orders are of a higher value above 800 pounds, you will need to understand the time it takes to clear brokerage and customs and add that to your customers' or your distributor's expectations. So something to think about there. Much more to navigate in terms of rules and regulations, but we did want to share a few things with you up front. We hope that can help you get started. So let's go to tip 2, familiarize yourself with the market. A couple things we think you should know about the market in China. So believe it or not, just getting your goods into China is not the hardest thing, but understanding the market and customers, which will be tip 3, be very important. So you should know a couple things. So China is now the world's largest market for luxury goods. It's the largest e-commerce market. Groceries, so food and drink, it's the largest market. Retail's got a 12% expected CAGR for the next 3 years. As a UK company or a company operating in the UK, you should know there are good opportunities for you with respect to some of the business processes you're already doing today. So you think about online marketplaces already established in China, Alibaba, Tmall, Tmall, promoting products in social media. So you may be doing that here. You're going to have to likely choose different platforms in China like Weibo, but social media in order to amplify your brand and your message will be very important in China as a UK company. How about holidays? This is something overlooked. So we know our holidays here in our culture, but holidays in China can literally heat up the market to being on fire, or it can put your market literally to sleep for a matter of weeks. So it's going to have a significant impact on your sales and what you're seeing, and it could cause some concern or delight if you don't know the holiday schedules there. So definitely understand Lunar New Year. You should know when Golden Week is, a Singles Day, which has become the largest e-commerce event in the world, and a Cyber Monday times several factors. 120,000 transactions a minute last year for Singles Day. And I'll just note, out of just coincidence and good timing, if you happen to go on the trade mission to Hong Kong and China, you will actually be in China on Singles Day and have access to kind of behind the scenes look at what it means from you can see all these orders flowing through China, the UPS state-of-the-art hub that day. And let me tell you, you got to believe that seeing this magnitude of e-commerce orders being processed in a short period of time is something you won't forget. So tip 3, get to know your customers. So make no mistake, Chinese consumers and e-consumers are becoming progressively sophisticated in their expectations from e-tailers and from the e-commerce environment. And this will also translate into your relationships with, if you choose to go through distributors or agents, but areas like website capabilities, social media presence, delivery options, those are the basics for the Chinese e-commerce consumer. And so let's give an example. So for instance, so say you're going to go direct, sell direct into China, you're going to set up a website, web shop on a marketplace or even on your own. You should up front, or you should really consider very quickly having your site translated into the local language. Or it could be in the case of China, you could really need Mandarin and Cantonese. Your goods, your prices, your transactions, you should really think about putting it in the local currency, RMB. That's the expectation of the Chinese consumer, and having different delivery options is also a key expectation. So even if you choose the distributor, an agent, a joint venture, something, whether or not you activate that relationship here locally and sell into China, or you set one up there, that the final customer, if they're buying online, those are basic everyday expectations. So do make sure you're working with your partners, should you choose one, your distribution partners, to ensure that those basics are part of your customer, the end customer's everyday experience with your goods. So last tip, and we'll move into some questions. Don't forget returns. It's not just about getting the goods into China. The consumer there is clearly has an expectation that returns will be easy to understand and easy to execute. So think about your return policy, if you have one, and what it may be around the packaging of a good return, so unopened package. This needs to be translated carefully so that it's easy to understand in the local language. The days of if you have a constraint on the number of days your order could be can be returned. Think about the transit into China might be 2 to 10 days, and is that part included in your maybe 30-day delivery window, for example? Versus if you're selling, obviously in this market, there's a much shorter time to customer, and how that's going to impact the customer experience. But we think it's an area of opportunity, quite frankly. We've done some surveys very broadly throughout Asia, but definitely with a focus on China. We saw 36, so less than 40% of online consumers felt satisfied with the return process. So as you enter the market, or should you choose to, a good and clear, easy to understand return policy, a good way to potentially differentiate up front from maybe your local domestic competition there. So those are the four tips. Really get a grip and truly understand the rules and regulations. Familiarize yourself with the market. Remember, I talked about those holidays as an example. Get to know your customer, their expectations based on what channel they're buying from you, and do not forget returns. So we think all these will greatly increase your probability of being successful in launching into China. And I think once you've considered and maybe acted on a few of these, you'll be ready to really get in and export to China.
Kyle, thank you so much. I'm guessing that's where I jump in.
Perfect.
So yeah, thank you so much for that. Some really good little cross-check stuff for bits and pieces that would be super helpful for people going on this mission, or just generally looking at doing business with China. So thank you so much for sharing those with us this lunchtime. As Carl said, question time. This is your chance to ask, one of the experts in this field, if not probably one of the biggest experts, any questions you've got. So fire them in, send a question, you just type it in the box, and it'd be my pleasure to pass them on to Kyle. Kyle, first one, it's quite a simple one, and also just to say to Ronka, who messaged in with it, don't forget you can watch this presentation back. So if there are any bits that you want to listen to again, or things you weren't quite sure about, you can watch it as many times as you like on the website. She was just keen to ask you to repeat the name of the EORIN number you mentioned near the beginning of the presentation, Carl. Would that be possible?
Absolutely. Listen, getting this customs and the tariff codes right and your licensing up front is critical. So let me repeat it. It's EORI. It's the Economic Operators Registration and Identification. It is issued by the UK government. You can find it, I think, most easily at just www.gov.uk. But the getting the wrong duties, import duties, or the wrong VAT assigned to your order is a make or break issue for many companies launching into China. Getting the tariff codes right, harmonized, absolutely a key step one. So thanks for asking.
That's great. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for your question, Ronka. Melanie's been in touch. Her question: I've heard horrible stories about new products being exported to China only to find them counterfeited within days of arrival. Do you have any tips on how to avoid that? Any things towards the trademarking in China, or any things that you've come across in the workings that you've done out there?
I think the area that we would most kind of recommend people pursue in terms of additional information there would be, if that's a concern, it would be, an area you may want to pursue is a channel involving a trusted distributor or a trading partner who has maybe reach into a more trusted part of the market. I mean, the space that you're kind of referring to is a big part of the risk going into China. But I think the best kind of risk mitigation there would be, if it is an area of concern for you and you think you've got an innovative product, is working through different maybe joint ventures or agents or trusted distributors. That's probably the best answer I could give you.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and it makes complete sense, because it's that thing of you've got to have as much peace of mind as you can, really. So anything you can do to get that makes complete sense. Thanks for that, Kyle. A question here from Lydia. What would you say would be better for me to send out? Hang on, let me start that again. What would you say it would be better for me to send out a container load to store and send on demand in China, or to continue to ship on demand from the UK? Lydia said she's averaging around 20 orders a week to the region at the moment already. Do you have any advice on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a fairly complex supply chain question. I mean, so once you send that container out, you have to have that place to store it in China, and you have to have the relationship with somebody to warehouse and then ultimately distribute it to you. There's clearly going to be some scale that you're going to gain through that. If you can afford the inventory expense up front, it is a more cost-efficient way to actually move the goods from point A to point B in that container load. But you've got to look at obviously, once you add on the warehousing, the risk factor, loss mitigation in terms of what happens within the warehouse, and then the end distribution, and then the choice and your options on the carrier point, at that final mile delivery. Many different parts of the supply chain that you're really addressing and taking on that movement versus your just your more single order type shipments, maybe a little bit more expensive front in the order. But that warehousing and distribution question is on a lot of folks' mind on both sides of this trade flow we're talking about. Chinese looking into the UK, as well as UK exporters looking into China. So a lot more information, and I would suggest a good place to start would be looking for a logistics and distribution provider in China, of which I'm happy to say UPS has a pretty big footprint in that business, so we can provide some additional insights on that if you'd like.
That's great, Kyle. Thank you. And it actually leads on to another question here that I've got from Lynn, rather nicely, asking, do UPS provide any storage facilities or warehousing themselves in China?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question.
In a word.
Yeah, there are, and it's we do it industry specific if there's a commodity type that requires special type of warehousing, or more broadly, we can take almost any commodity and warehouse it in an appropriate location based on, again, remember I talked about all the different provinces and the consumer segments. So we'd look at that and help find the right place within the country for your goods.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny how these things go. I've got another question here. It must have been based off that topic that you were talking about earlier from Michael. Do you have any advice on choosing the location of the warehouse in China? As you said, you mentioned, where is best for certain different bits and pieces. And would you suggest where would you suggest I could achieve the best rates to the rest of the territory? So I guess that's, to do with the different locations. Are there any sort of hot tips that you've got on any of that?
Right. Well, so you could answer that. Let me add a little context, right? We tend to think in basic supply chain that you put your freight as close to your goods close to the consumer in the big population centers. The thing with China to understand is there's probably 100 cities with more than 10 million people in it. And that may not be the exact number, but it'll be something like that. The primary kind of main inbound areas are going to be the Shanghai. You're going to look up in the east, somewhat central east, north, that's Shanghai area, and then the south, Shenzhen. And that's very close to Hong Kong. Both have some of the largest ocean ports in the world, so you get access to that, as well as some of the biggest air cargo facilities in the world. Those would be starting points, and I think we'll have a lot of options in terms of solutions providers in those geographies. as you have a better understanding of your potential customer base in China, it's going to make sense though to do much more detailed mapping and find somebody like a UPS who's got multiple operating facilities spread across this massive consumer population base.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so difficult because it's all so niche. It's so tricky in our little masterclass half-hour sessions to get into this sort of specifics. But that's super helpful. I hope that really helped, Michael. Thank you very much for your question. Nicola Dickinson, thank you very much for your question. If I want to have a distributor, who should pay for shipping? Slightly, probably a little bit out of territory here, Carl, but if you've got any insight, that would be great. She says that she's been told by the person in China that she should pay for it. Do you have any thoughts or insight on any of that at all?
I mean, it could go either way. I mean, if it's an Incoterm discussion, are you shipping prepaid? Are you doing inbound freight collect? This could be, I don't know if that's a distributor, agent, or a consumer. There could be a question over who's going to pay the duties, who's going to pay any VAT, because that can move based on the preference of the shipper or the consignee. So it's really a basic economic question. The cost of the shipping is going to be embedded in the goods somewhere, whether or not you set it in the sale price and shipper. I mean, it's an economic question. I guess that's, you put the price of the transaction inclusive of that price of shipping, and you could be okay. Where you got to be careful and you need to research a little further, I think, is if it's an Incoterm, which is really going to get into who's responsible for paying the duties and the taxes.
Yeah, and so, as you say, it's that sort of thing that's tied up perhaps within the individual sort of agreements. But thank you very much for that, Nicola. That's great. And Kyle, thanks for your insight on that. Question here from Susie. At what order levels do you start offering discounts on the unit price of delivery? Have you got any facts and figures to hand roughly for that, Kyle, to give us a bit of an idea?
I mean, all of our, so we have we have a solution where really anybody can get a discount off their shipping any day, and it's called upstoday.com. And I would strongly recommend going to that site and just putting in upstoday.com. You can enter your destination, country, you put in your origin, some very simple information on the shipment, number of pieces, weight. You will get a discounted rate. And then anything beyond that, we will always put custom, pricing agreements together for customers based on your distinct needs and the characteristics of your business. So, but I'll tell you, just today, in the next minute, you can have a quote on upstoday.com, which will be discounted from our published rates.
Oh, amazing. Look at that. Real-time action. Love it. Thank you so much. And thanks very much, Susie, for your question. David has got one for you, Kyle. So this is his question. My market in China is currently quite minimal, but I have good sales in regions near to there, such as Singapore and Indonesia. For a UK shipper, if my products were stored in China, would the rates to ship these to other territories be more preferable than from the UK? This is something that I'm debating, and it might influence my decision to warehouse my product in China, which I can totally see. Yeah, are there any differences, do you think, in those two options?
So that's a good question, because
it's quite specific, isn't it?
Well,
yeah,
there's 10 different ways to answer it. You could look at different free trade, zones as within China, but just to keep it a little simpler, quite simply.
That's good. It's lunchtime.
Yeah, you're covering less distance, right, in intra-Asia shipments. There is a vast intra-Asia air and ocean network. Remember that Asia's largest trading partner is Asia. So there is an expansive network, really truck, air, and ocean, connecting all different Asian countries and markets. So there's an opportunity to do it efficiently from a delivery speed and a cost, but you've still obviously got to consider the price of getting it to China first into warehousing. The best thing I can tell you now, though, is you can trust that there is an efficient and reliable network within Asia if you choose China as your origin.
Amazing. Kyle, thank you so much. So just to wrap things up, thank you very much for everyone for all the questions. We've had loads through today, so thanks so much for sending them in. Kyle, just to wrap up the session, if you're just to summarize one thing someone is, this is what they're thinking of. What's the thing you want them to go away with today from our presentation? Like the main thing that from what you've spoken about to stick in people's minds.
Yeah, I think we tend to be pretty good at the homework up front, and everybody's going to probably take a stab at understanding duties and taxes. I really want to propose that people think about that end consumer in China and how difficult it is to understand them if you're doing that from here and you don't have
Yeah,
that put feet on the street kind of perspective of who they are. I mean, it should be obvious, I think, to some of us who've been in Asia that your website should be in Mandarin and Cantonese and that you should be selling in RMB. But I will promise you, because we work with shippers and retailers and across many different industries every day, there are people selling into that market using English, French, German, euros,
mm.
pounds, and we got to think a little bit differently, I think, when you look at that consumer base in China.
That is so helpful. Thank you so much. And obviously, a great way to do that, to get out there and to get a feel your potential customers, is to join us on our mission. UPS are our sponsor for EN Go Global Trade Missions. Our next one is Amsterdam, New York, but this one we've been talking about today to China and Hong Kong is happening in November. We'd love you to join us. We really would. If you want more details about it, head to our website, enterprisenation.com/go global. You'll see the program, you'll see the whole setup of things on there. And if you've got any inquiries at all, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And hopefully it'll be a great excuse for you to put some of these tips that we've had from Kyle today into practice, and chat to other people who are doing the same thing, as well as gain some seriously useful, this is just a taster of the information that you can learn by joining us on that mission. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today this lunchtime. Really, really appreciate your insight into all of these bits and pieces. And don't forget to join us next week for another member masterclass, 12:30 on Tuesday. We will see you then. Kyle, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Bye.